Yeah, so I wanted to provide a quick highlight, kind of application usage level of the concepts Jim was talking about here. And particularly, I want to talk about the Open Science Pool. So it's a Condor resource pool that we run for within the OSG. And it's just like everything else here, it's going through quite a bit of transition of how we acquire resources, how we authenticate internally and authorize internally, and then how we can provide services to users. So I wanted to give this as an example of 3 different ways that we're using tokens today in the Open Science Pool, and kind of how it's transitioning from the pieces prior and where we are in the transition. All right, so use case 1. So of course, one of the essential things we need to do is go from acquiring resources through pilots submitted to CEs to acquiring resources through pilots submitted to CEs. And the way we do this is through Glide and WMS. There's a component called the front end that measures the job pressure in the pool and requests resources from clusters as necessary. If pilots are needed, it sends a request out to the central factory, and it used to encrypt a copy of our X509 certificate, and now it encrypts a copy of our a particular token that we've generated for each CE. So that nice little token moves along from front end, which we control, to the factory, which is a multi-VO instance. And then the factory submits those individual pilots to the CE using the site token. That the second arrow here from factory to CE is authenticated with the site token, versus here, this is just carried along as an attribute in this request. It uses the Cedar protocol from Condor, and particularly the site tokens authentication method within the Cedar protocol. So the pilot side uses this token to authenticate itself to the server, and the server uses a traditional X509 host certificate to identify itself to the client here. So this side needs the X509 still, looks very traditional host certificate-like. And here we've replaced the usage of proxy with the usage of a token. Unlike when we use X509 and we identify ourselves as the front end for OSG, for example, we actually generate a token per CE. This is meant to ensure that the token is only acceptable at a single host. All other hosts, all other CEs reject it. So this is an example of the decode version of what we sent to New Mexico State University. And this allows us to minimize the blast radius. A stolen token, a compromised CE can only compromise itself further. It can't compromise Safe Learning Lab. And then we also limited this to a 1-hour expiration. The token only needs to create the session with the CE, and the token does not go to the pilot, and therefore doesn't need to have a long-lived queue time, for example. So the status, there's 137 CEs that check in with the OSG. Some smaller percentage of that actually allows the Open Science Pool. And 52 of those both allow the Open Science Pool and accept tokens from the OSPool. So, of course, some of those that don't support our tokens just don't support the OSPool at all. And of the CEs that are actually run by the OSG, these are hosted CE offering 97 or 37 out of 38 currently accept site tokens. So we basically have one broken CE that we need to trace down. And would love to work with missing sites tomorrow to help close that gap and get these accepted at more locations. And then here is an example of actually querying a pilot and seeing the fact that it's authenticated with a token. Case two, the execution point. So the worker or the pilot or the Condor start D, whatever you call it, needs to go back to the central manager of the Condor pool. There's basically three kinds of daemons: the access point, execution point, and central manager. And everything has to be able to get back to that central manager, authenticate, and then join and work with the pool. We don't actually use site tokens for this. We use Condor's ID token format. It's a slightly different approach. It uses symmetric encryption. And one of the reasons I like the ID tokens using a separate format for this is it's actually useless for anything except the one purpose of registering our execution point up to the central manager. So one way this is done is alongside that site token, we can send out an ID token, and instead of stopping at the CE, it gets all the way down to the execution point. And of course, that means there's some queue time here, which means that this unfortunately is relatively longer lived than I would like to see. The other thing that we have set up that are very popular with the Kubernetes crowd is a sysadmin can go to one of our requested token, go to the registry, and if they're approved and authenticate through CI logon, approve the token request, and be able to get this as a secret inside Kubernetes, and then allows them to launch an execution point that connects up to the central manager wherever they want. As I said, this is popular for those wanting to backfill Kubernetes, and the OSG documentation for this is actually getting very nice. So I had a horribly complicated bash query to look through all our different collectors in the open science pool. And as of this week, of about 30,000 slots that were connected at the time of query, 95% of them were advertised via ID tokens. Since we control the end-to-end, that last 5% appears just to be misconfigurations on our side. This is pretty much done. And then finally, the third way that we use tokens is job access to storage. So of course, again, the ID token is used to connect the execution point to the pool. That allows it to pull down and execute jobs. At the access point, we run the Condor-CredMon daemon, and this daemon ensures that whatever job, whatever token is needed for a job, not only shows up at the beginning of the job, but also gets periodically renewed for the job lifetime. So the way we do this is at the access points for OSG Connect on the open science pool, we automatically generate tokens that can be used for reading data from the user's home directory at one of our origin servers. We use X3B for the software. And we ensure that all the jobs get an appropriate token for reading from our origin server. Here you can see I can either read or write in these scopes to my home directory. And this third use case has actually been the longest lasting one. So this has been in production at various levels of use for about 4 years, as at least according to Git history, when we first set this up on OSG Connect. Is one of the earliest users of the Condor-CredMon setup, worked through quite a few bugs. And as this is gaining steam, we're continuously doing small improvements, such as improving error messages, improving integration with Condor file transfer, new origin servers, and so forth. So finally, 2 bonus topics. One, I wanted to mention the HTC pool. With the Condor 930 release candidate we recently upgraded to, we now actually run a version of Condor that doesn't have GSI support built in. So not only for this particular HTC pool, not only do we prefer tokens, but if you come to us with a GSI proxy, we won't understand what to do with it, at least in terms of authentication is concerned. So that is something where a little more on the bleeding edge, but it shows it can be done completely without GSI. And then finally, I want to mention you can actually use OAuth, particularly for logging in through SSH. So one of our access points, if you don't care for SSH pub keys, when you want to log in, you can actually use the device flow and log in your browser through CI logon to get access to SSH. that's it. That's where we are, and that's how far we've gone. Any questions?
All right, yeah, thanks, Brandon. We have time for at least a few questions. Max, I see you first, so you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, Brian, simple question. In the one of the beginning of the slides, when you were just starting to describe tokens for computing element, when you say we generate a token per computing element, what do you mean by we? I mean,
yeah.
Please read my question from a site admin point of view.
Yeah. So here, this dotted line is meant to signify kind of where the site admin lives, and up here is the OSPool. And actually, I like to think of the Glide and WMS factory as a third party for this conversation. The fact that maybe the same human brain works on both is irrelevant. So we here means that the OSPool, as part of Glide WMS, if it decides it wants to support or submit using site tokens for that particular endpoint. Right now, we keep a list of endpoints where we think tokens are working and lists where we don't. And lists where we think tokens are working, we create so the front end process runs a script that requests and generates a site token that then gets sent to the factory and sent to the CE. At the CE side, this comes in through the Condor map file. So there's a line in the map file that says, if you see a token coming from this particular issuer, it maps to that particular Unix account. Yeah, so apologies. Some here, OSG is way overloaded. And I try to use OSPool where I really mean the OSPool, but did not do it thoroughly.
So I have a question. Somebody unmuted me. I didn't unmute myself. Is there any schedule for the various hosted CEs that OSG manages to go tokens only?
I would like to remain this calendar year go tokens only where we can, right? So some of these CEs only support the OSG VO, or only support the OSPool, I should say.
Right.
And those, since we control the end-to-end, it's almost arbitrary when we want to move them over. For the remaining CEs, that say maybe support the OSPool and CMS or the OSPool and Dune or that's something that we have to make sure to coordinate with all the other users.
Yeah. I'm most concerned with the ones in front of HPC sites, the Exceed sites, and particularly those are the ones that I'm concerned with at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, obviously I'd like to do that all by February 22 is the current goal, but that's part of the point of the workshop. Frank said is to make sure we talk tomorrow about what's going well and what's slipping.
It is not clear that Glide WMS 3.9 is ready for prime time to do that yet, although it's getting there.
Yeah, for this setup, particularly to get CHTC working end-to-end, zero GSI anywhere, I think we carry about maybe 50 lines of Python patches. Not nothing, but not large, somewhere in the, I'd say, middle.
Okay.
I see one more question. So Mark, if you want to ask your question.
Yeah, so in our initial playing around with this over at Fermilab, the corner of this whole system that I'm still confused, I guess, what the best way to set it up is DAGman, which is that, if you've set everything up to require site token authentication, then in particular, a DAGman needs to use a token to submit the jobs from the DAG back to the cluster. And I wonder if you could say a few words about how you set that up, or do you set it up so it doesn't have to do that, or?
Yeah, you know, particularly we turned off or don't have GSI, but one of the other authentication methods Condor calls FS, which is basically Unix authentication. So the Dagman process, because it's running as, say, user Brian, is able to prove to the SCED it's user Brian through Unix means, no tokens involved. So yeah, we simply just have multiple authentication methods, one of which is file system. And I can go more in detail on that on the note stock, since I see we're out of time.